So a lot of focus, obviously, on this on the right-wing party coming into Parliament. Is it really going to move the dial, though, as far as policy in Germany?
Well, first thing we need to, of course, understand the AfD will not be part of any government anytime soon, anywhere, at any level of government. I think that's the first given that we have to take into account. But, of course, the other parties will react. And, of course, what the task that we have now is to build a coalition. And this coalition, given that the Social Democrats and Martin Schulz said were not available for another grand coalition, there's only one option left on the table, which is so-called Jamaica with the Liberals and the Green Party. I think actually there is, in some areas, more overlap between them than the commentators have so far recognized. But in the subjects that the financial markets are possibly most interested in, like deepening of European integration or a new architecture for the Eurozone, I think the inclusion of the FDP will make that very hard. I think Macron in particular might be disappointed by that because the FDP has made it quite clear in the campaign and also last night at the after-election debate that this is a red line for them, that they are sort of not giving their support to any mutualization of European liabilities, etc., etc. So I think there will be no major step forward. And of course, this has implications also for the somewhat weaker sovereigns in the Eurozone, which might have been hoping for a more lenient stance coming from Berlin.
Well, do you think that FDP stance is priced in? I mean, do you think we're going to see spreads, peripheral spreads kind of blowing out as negotiations progress?
Well, I think it should be priced in. I mean, the FDP has not sort of sprung this as a surprise. They've been saying this all along. And what maybe people haven't recognized fully is, and I believe that they're very determined to hold that line, because in the last parliament they were not represented for the first time in post-war history, because in the previous parliament they didn't stick to their promises. So I think they're not going to commit the same mistake twice. I think they will hold to the red lines that they've given, which makes the negotiation between the parties harder. But I would be very surprised if they were to give way on sort of more Europe on the financial terms. I mean, they're a pro-European party, don't get me wrong, but I think there's no appetite to give more sort of resources to the European level. And the same is true for the sister party of Merkel in Bavaria, the CSU, which has got a real drubbing as well. We actually lost more than the CDU itself. And they have elections coming up in their federal state next October or so. Regional elections. So it's going to be really difficult for them to be more conciliatory. So I would not expect any major progress on that front. There may be symbolic steps, but not really game changers.
Moritz, you say, good morning from London, it's Guy. You say that the market should have priced in the FDP and its view on peripheral Europe. Did you price it in when you upgraded Portugal? Was that first sort of top of mind when you were thinking about this, how the FDP could impact the peripheral story when you made that Portuguese decision?
Yes, we did. When we raised the rating of Portugal back to investment grade, it was not based on some expectation of support from third parties or the other countries or the EU. I think it was a reflection of the progress that the Portuguese authorities themselves have made in turning the ship around. It's still pretty fragile. I mean, it's a BBB- rating in Portugal. It's the lowest investment grade. But I think there's been progress, and the progress been largely homemade. So this should not have any impact on our rating of Portugal or indeed any other sovereign in the Eurozone. On the other hand, if we had more mutualization, it might have lifted up some of the ratings, depending on the circumstances, how this would have happened.
What is your view, Moritz, on the Catalan referendum? Would that be ratings negative if the Catalans decide to vote for independence? Is that something that we need to price in as a risk?
I think we need to price that into the risk. That's a clear sort of political risk in Spain. You may remember the conversations we had before the Scottish referendum. I think losing a big chunk of your national territory and your economy would be a pretty significant step for any country. Now, of course, Scotland was different because there was an agreed constitutional process, whereas the Catalan nationalists are conducting this on their own steam against the opposition of Madrid. So this would not have sort of a legal standing or constitutional sustainability. But nevertheless, it can, of course, lead to further fractions in the political system and may hamper the ability of the Spanish government to implement policies that will be needed to still continue sort of on the growth path and bring unemployment down. So this is a risk. And I think this is another reflection of how politics have become so much more difficult, not only in European countries, but I think in the G7 and the advanced economies overall.
Moritz, can I ask you about the UK downgrade? I've read a lot about it, I've read your notes, and my takeaway from it is that what you're saying is that the UK institutions appear weaker, or at least that the government is so distracted by the Brexit process that that is the net result. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, we lowered the rating of the UK directly the day after the referendum, pretty much by 2 notches. And the reason for that was indeed that we think that the political institutions that have really been excelling in stability and predictability and checks and balances and all of that for decades, if not centuries, we felt that this has been weakened. There was a first inkling of that when the Scottish referendum came and was narrowly won, depending on which side you're standing on. But with the Brexit vote, I think it became pretty clear that the path of policymaking is much less clear in the UK than it was. That's an important factor for creditworthiness. You need to know what the strategy is, where the country is likely to go. And anything we've seen since the downgrade, like 15 months ago or so, there's nothing that suggests that this was the wrong assessment. I think even today we don't have much clarity of what the actual direction of travel is. There still seems to be a discussion on the cabinet table of what the UK sees as its future. This is a concern in terms of governance and institutional stability.
What did you take away from Friday's Florence speech? Did you get any sense of direction as far as negotiations are concerned there?
Well, I think it was a clear sort of olive branch that she was holding out. Say, look, so we're willing to talk about money. I think this is really the sticking point at that level of the conversations. Now, today they're restarting the conversations in Brussels at the technical teams. But frankly, there was not that much new substance in terms of what is the direction of travel, what I just mentioned. What is the new steady state relationship with the EU? Saying we have a deep and special relationship, that's all fine, but what does that actually mean? What kind of relationship is the UK angling for? And all the time, of course, the clock is ticking and time is running out pretty quickly. So I think it was a speech that may help to create sort of a better environment for the talks, which have been a little bit rocky, it seems, lately. But it's really to the negotiators on the ground now to hammer out details, because this was pretty lofty talk at the end.